Welcome back everybody. In today's video we're going to be doing something a little bit different from my typical videos in that I'm going to be doing a sort of review, or rather an overview of a mod that's coming out for Resident Evil 4. Now you might be saying to yourself things like, oh, Resident Evil 4, hasn't that been released about as many times as Borderlands 2? Like, why do I really care? And the reason why this mod in particular has kind of interested me is that previously, Resident Evil 4 has received a number of texture updates, HD textures. People have released upscaled videos for the FMV files that the game originally had, and they made them, essentially more up to date. Something that basically plays nicer with all of our high res screens, etc. And there have been a number of different character mods, models, etc. that have come out over the years, and this is pretty much par for the course in any PC game. But the difference here with this particular mod now is that not only are they overhauling the textures with actual images taken in the same cities that the original dev team took pictures in, but they're also going the extra mile. They're actually going through and redoing a lot of the 3D work in the game as well. So that means anything from pipes, anything from tables, chairs, and things like that that previously would be pretty low resolution are now getting an update, and the team is doing a pretty excellent work of keeping the textures and all the files that had originally a certain kind of art to them. They're keeping that very consistent as much as possible. And this is really different from the previous HD texture projects that have come out in the past. For many years now, the Resident Evil community has been doing HD textures for all kinds of games, just basically across the board. Now, however, you're actually seeing a team come together and really take a huge crack at this title in terms of improving everything just across the board. And this is major news simply because if you're a Resident Evil fan, or maybe somebody who at this point maybe hasn't played Resident Evil 4, then this particular project, even at the state that it's in now, with just some of these textures being upscaled, is going to be a huge deal. But you have to remember that they're not just doing some sort of AI upscaling and making the original textures just a little bit sharper. Instead, they're getting brand new source images and taking some stuff that was already in the PC HD port and then just touching them up just a little bit to make them seem even nicer than they were before. And again, this makes the art aspect of the game essentially maintain its quality like it would have been presented to you had the game come with those art assets that are upscaled or higher resolution from the beginning. And this is great news because it just makes the experience a lot more seamless for you as the player. And the team clearly is very dedicated as they've made their own tools to make this thing work, which again is just absolutely fantastic. And typically, within the PC modding community, you do have a lot of texture packs that just are kind of a hodgepodge of different kind of textures that somebody gathered off of basically any kind of stock photo sites or anything that supplies generic libraries of textures to modders to be able to use and to other artists, etc. But this is going the extra mile in the sense that, again, they're really making use of textures that are authentic to the game, authentic to the area that the game is set in, and this is going to make the experience just a little bit better than it typically would be with your, run-of-the-mill mod. And last but not least, the improvements that they're making, essentially across the board to this title are all being released for free once the sort of final version of this mod drops. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, okay, that's great, but a lot of mods are also free as well. But that's just it, is that this guy in particular, I'm gonna not mention his name, but you can check out the link yourselves. He has done an incredible job of getting people together for this project to really make it stand out amongst all the other countless mods that exist out there. Now, I would say that this has gone pretty much to the scale that you would see in something like the Morrowind remake, where they've done essentially a texture and shader expansion to that game, and they made it look just miles beyond what it looked originally. You could also think of any number of Skyrim mods, as well as the Crysis 2 HD texture pack that came out a couple years ago, that again, really stay true to the art style of the original games to make it just really pop. And of course, you do have to consider the fact that Resident Evil, even though they have mentioned that there will be some kind of a remake coming down the road, it's not entirely clear when that's going to be, and it's a good chance that most likely this will be a title released specifically to the next-gen consoles, It's not going to be 100% clear if they'll be bringing this title to PC as well, as I'd imagine they probably have bigger sales on the consoles anyhow. But with that said, there hasn't really been too much concrete info out there on this project as of yet, and so this will essentially be the definitive experience of playing the game, in the sense that it's going to be actually coming out pretty soon, with the target date being in Q4 of 2021 for the final release of this project, or at least version 1.0, as most of us would come to know titles and expansions like this in the past. And again, you want to really kind of take a look at this project because there's some cool stuff being done in the background. Now, I don't know if this team will be releasing their tools that they use. That they've developed a number of proprietary tech and proprietary tools to essentially dissect the files. Basically, they've created unpackers and repackers to package different 3D models as well as various other files within the game, and it sounds like they're going to be making some changes to the game's executable, given that they've mentioned a lot of hex editing that's gone on under the hood to make changes to specific objects, and etc. So there's probably going to be some changes to the game code under the kind of workings that you see otherwise within this title, but at the same time they're staying more or less within the same kind of game engine environment that they have before. This isn't something like the Halo CE mod open source, where they've actually basically run an engine on top of the original engine to make it look better and to extend the amount of shader support that the original engine simply wouldn't be able to cope with. This doesn't seem like it's going as in-depth as that. However, it is taking bits and bobs and making them look a lot better as a whole, and hopefully this is a project that I'll be able to keep track of and do a good video on it to do some really good comparison shots with the game as it released in its HD version or HD re-release on the PC, and then finally do a comparison with this mod and without, so you can see what kind of differences there are. Now, for those of you that don't remember, there was a port of Resident Evil 4 to the PC many years ago, and it had a lot of issues that needed to be fixed right out of the box, with poor mouse support, basically no way to really edit key bindings, etc. And of course, you were stuck using the garbage cutscenes that were essentially ported over from the PS2. Now, this project, I'm not sure if they've actually mentioned if they're going to be redoing the cutscenes as well. I haven't seen that mentioned in the article that you've seen scrolling in this video thus far, so there's a chance that they may not necessarily do that. However, there is already a large number of files that have been upscaled and remade from the GameCube port, and specifically these video files were run through on an emulator and then re-recorded so that you could get those in essentially 2D versus in-engine on the PC, as we do not have in-engine cutscenes even with the HD port of the game from the last time that I remember reading about it. Now, I might be wrong on this last part, but as far as I know, those cutscenes were still taken from the PS2. Potentially, maybe they've done some work to kind of do some restoration, but with that said, I didn't feel like the cutscenes have received nearly as much love, so we'll see if this is something that ends up panning out for this project as well. However, I think this one is definitely one to keep an eye on, just given how much resources are being poured into this to really make it stand out and really make it a definitive version of this game that otherwise, would only be done essentially by the AAA studio themselves, as Capcom have recently released Resident Evil 2 and 3 remakes that have done a pretty incredible job of staying pretty faithful to the original games while also updating them with much more modern game mechanics. So stick around for my next video on this, where we'll hopefully take a look at the games running side by side so you can see what the differences really are between the original and between this new title that is now essentially being modded from the ground up to make it really look incredible. So see you guys in the next video.